The knock came at exactly 10:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. I know because I was reviewing quarterly reports when Mom's first panicked call lit up my phone like a Christmas tree. But let me back up 2 years, to the moment that set this beautiful disaster in motion. "I don't think that's a good idea, Jimmy." Those were the exact words Mom used when I asked her to co-sign my car loan. I remember sitting at her kitchen table, my laptop open to the Honda dealership's financing page, showing her the numbers in black and white. I'd saved $8,000 for the down payment. 8,000. Cash. From my accountant's salary at Henderson and Associates. "Mom, look at this," I'd said, turning the screen toward her. 18,000 for a 2019 Honda Accord. Certified pre-owned. 38,000 miles. If you co-sign, I get 3.9% interest instead of 7.2%. That's $2,400 I'd save over the life of the loan. She'd stirred her coffee slowly, avoiding eye contact. The spoon clinked against the ceramic mug in a rhythm that felt like a countdown timer to disappointment. "What if something happens?" she finally asked. "What if you lose your job?" I'd pulled out my phone, opened my banking app. "I have 12,000 in emergency savings, plus the 8,000 down payment." "Mom, I've never missed a payment on anything in my life. My credit score is 720. She'd set down the spoon, folded her hands. "I don't feel comfortable with it." The words hung in the air like smoke. I'd nodded, closed the laptop, driven home, and bought the car anyway at 7.2% interest. $2,400 down the drain because my own mother didn't trust me to pay a car loan. 3 months later, Chuck rolled up to Sunday dinner in a brand new Ford F-250. $52,000. Brand new. Not certified pre-owned. Not practical. Not necessary. A massive, gleaming monument to financial irresponsibility that probably got 12 miles to the gallon on a good day. "Holy crap, Chuck," I'd said, walking around the truck in Mom's driveway. "This thing is huge. What did this cost?" 52, he'd grinned, patting the hood like it was a prized stallion. "But it's an investment, you know, for the landscaping business." The landscaping business. Chuck's latest entrepreneurial venture, which consisted of him buying a used lawnmower from Craigslist and making flyers on Mom's computer. He'd had the business for exactly 6 weeks. 52,000, I'd repeated, because sometimes you have to say ridiculous numbers out loud to process them properly. "Mom co-signed for me," Chuck had said casually, like he was mentioning the weather. I'd felt something cold settle in my stomach. "She what?" "Co-signed the loan. She believes in me, you know? Supports my entrepreneurial spirit." Inside over Mom's famous pot roast, I'd tried to process this information like the numbers-focused person I am. Chuck's credit score was somewhere in the neighborhood of 580, thanks to multiple late payments, 2 defaulted credit cards, and that time he'd simply stopped paying rent and disappeared from his apartment in the middle of the night. His income was whatever cash he could convince people to pay him for mowing their lawns, which in October in Albuquerque was approaching zero. "Mom," I'd said carefully, cutting my pot roast into precise squares, "you co-signed a $52,000 loan for Chuck?" "I did." She'd beamed like she'd just announced she'd won the lottery. "He's starting a business. He needs support." "But you said no when I asked you to co-sign my $18,000 Honda." The table went quiet except for the sound of Chuck chewing. "That's different," Mom had said, not meeting my eyes. "How is it different?" "Chuck is building something. You just wanted a car." "I needed a car to get to work, to my stable, salaried job, where I've worked for 3 years without missing a day." "He's responsible," she'd said, and I'd felt those words hit me like a physical blow. You're not as mature about these things." Chuck had grinned at me across the table, a piece of pot roast stuck between his teeth. I'd set down my fork, folded my napkin, and stood up. "Okay. Just okay. Because what else do you say when your mother calls your financially irresponsible, chronically unemployed brother responsible and you immature? When she co-signs a loan that's nearly 3 times bigger for someone with terrible credit and no steady income, but won't help you save money on a sensible used car?" I'd driven home in my Honda Accord, the one costing me an extra $2,400 because my own mother didn't trust me to make payments, and I'd told my girlfriend Kim about dinner. She co-signed a $49,000 loan for Chuck? Kim had asked, looking up from her laptop where she was working on financial projections for her clients. Kim's a financial advisor, which means she spends her days helping people avoid exactly the kind of mistake my mother had just made. Yep. Chuck, who hasn't held a steady job in 5 years. Yep. Chuck, who still owes her $15,000 from that restaurant venture that lasted 8 months. Yep. Kim had closed her laptop and looked at me with the expression she usually reserved for clients who just told her they'd put their life savings into cryptocurrency. Your mom's going to regret this. I know. Are you going to say anything? Nope. Jimmy. Kim, I tried to warn her about the restaurant loan. I tried to explain why co-signing was a bad idea when she asked my opinion. She didn't listen. She never listens when it comes to Chuck. Kim had studied my face for a long moment. You're going to let her learn the hard way. I'm going to let Chuck teach her what I've been trying to tell her for 27 years. That was 2 years ago. 2 years of Chuck's landscaping business existing primarily in his imagination while he drove around town in a $52,000 truck, impressing girls at bars and posting Instagram photos of himself looking entrepreneurial in front of various suburban lawns he'd never actually mowed. 2 years of mom asking how my little car was running while bragging to her friends about Chuck's business success. 2 years of watching Chuck post photos of expensive dinners and weekend trips to Vegas while mom worked extra shifts at Macy's to make ends meet. 2 years of $890 monthly truck payments that Chuck made sporadically at best. Which brings us back to Tuesday morning, 10:17 a.m., when my phone started buzzing with mom's panicked calls. I was in the middle of reconciling a client's books when her name flashed across my screen for the 3rd time in 2 minutes. I let it go to voicemail, finished the spreadsheet I was working on, then listened to her message. Jimmy, there's a man at my house with a tow truck. He says he's here to take Chuck's truck, but Chuck doesn't live here. He says I'm responsible because I co-signed, but that's not how it works, right? Right? Call me back. I set the phone down and stared at it for a moment. Then I started laughing. Not cruel laughter. Not vindictive laughter. Just the pure, exhausted laughter of someone who'd been waiting 2 years for the other shoe to drop, and it had finally hit the ground with the satisfying thud of a repo truck in mom's driveway. My phone buzzed again. Text message. Jimmy, please call me back. This man says I owe money for Chuck's truck. Then another. He has papers, legal papers. Then, where is Chuck? He's not answering. I could picture the scene perfectly. Mom in her bathrobe and slippers, probably still holding her morning coffee, staring at some repo man with a clipboard and a very clear understanding of how co-signing works. Chuck nowhere to be found, because Chuck was never around when consequences came calling. The beautiful, perfect irony of it all was that the system was doing exactly what I'd tried to explain to her 2 years ago. When you co-sign a loan, you're not doing someone a favor. You're not helping them. You're telling the bank, if this person doesn't pay, I will. You're literally signing a document that says you're equally responsible for the debt. But mom had signed it anyway, because Chuck was responsible, and I wasn't. 3 days after the repo man left our driveway, mom's phone started ringing at 7 a.m. sharp. I knew because she called me right after, her voice shaking like autumn leaves. Jimmy, they're saying I owe $18,000. I was sitting at my desk at Henderson & Associates, reviewing quarterly tax returns for our biggest client. The morning sun streamed through the office windows, casting long shadows across my calculator and coffee mug. I'd been expecting this call since Monday when she first told me about Mike showing up with the tow truck. That sounds about right, I said, not looking up from my spreadsheets. The truck was worth maybe $38,000 now. Chuck owed $46,800 on the loan. After auction fees and repo costs, yeah. $18,000 sounds accurate. But Jimmy, I don't have $18,000. Her voice cracked on the word have, and I could picture her standing in her kitchen, still in her bathrobe, gripping the phone like it was a lifeline. I set down my pen and leaned back in my chair. Through my office window, I watched normal people walking to work, carrying coffee cups and briefcases, living their ordinary Tuesday lives. None of them were dealing with the aftermath of co-signing a $52,000 loan for their irresponsible brother. Mom, when you co-sign a loan, you become equally responsible for the debt. That's literally what co-signing means. But the truck is gone. They took it. Repossession doesn't erase the debt. It just reduces it by whatever they get at auction. I heard her sharp intake of breath, then silence. In the background, I could hear her coffee maker gurgling and the morning news playing on her kitchen TV. The same kitchen where she'd announced 3 months ago that she'd co-signed Chuck's loan while I sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, trying to process the hypocrisy. Chuck said he'd handle the payments, she whispered. Chuck says a lot of things. He's not answering his phone. Of course he wasn't. I'd watched Chuck disappear from responsibility my entire life. When we were kids and broke something, Chuck would vanish until the anger blew over. When he crashed Dad's car at 17, he went to stay with friends for a week. When his restaurant failed and Mom lost $15,000, Chuck moved to the other side of town and changed his number. How many times have you called him? I asked. 47 times since Monday. 47 times. I wrote the number down on a sticky note and pressed it to my computer monitor. 47 attempts to reach the golden child who destroyed her financial life. Jimmy, can you... She started, then stopped. Can I what? Can you try calling him? Maybe he'll answer for you. I actually laughed. Not a cruel laugh, just genuine amusement at the absurdity. Mom, Chuck blocked my number 2 years ago when I asked him to pay back the money he borrowed for his security deposit. He blocked you? After he called me jealous and said I needed to stop trying to control his life. Another silence. Longer this time. I could hear her breathing, shallow and quick. What am I going to do? She asked. You're going to pay the debt, or you're going to let it go to collections and deal with ruined credit for 7 years. I can't pay $18,000, Jimmy. I don't have it. Then payment plan, or bankruptcy. The word bankruptcy hung in the air like smoke. Mom had worked retail management for 23 years, never missed a payment on anything, took pride in her 720 credit score. The idea of bankruptcy probably felt like admitting failure at life itself. There has to be another way, she said. There isn't. Chuck created this mess. You enabled it by co-signing. Now you get to live with the consequences. That's harsh. It's reality. I hung up and went back to my tax returns, but I couldn't concentrate. The numbers on the spreadsheet blurred together as I thought about the pattern that had led to this moment. Chuck asking for help, Mom saying yes immediately, me asking for help, Mom finding reasons to say no. At lunch, I drove to the coffee shop near Mom's house and sat in my Honda Accord, the reliable, practical car I'd bought with my own down payment and higher interest rate because she wouldn't co-sign. Through the window, I watched customers come and go, normal people with normal family problems. None of them were probably dealing with $30,000 in debt accumulated by their irresponsible siblings. My phone buzzed. Text from Mom. Bank called again. They want to set up payment plan. $340 a month for 6 years. I did the math in my head. 340 times 72 months. $24,480. The $18,000 debt would cost her over $24,000 with interest and fees. I texted back, that's what payment plans cost. Can't afford $340 a month. Then what can you afford? Maybe $150. That'll take 12 years and cost you over $30,000 total. My phone rang immediately. $30,000? Mom's voice was barely a whisper. Interest and fees. That's how debt works. For a truck I never drove. For a loan you co-signed. I heard her crying then, soft sobs that made my chest tight. But I didn't offer to help. I couldn't. This was the natural consequence of 27 years of choosing Chuck over me, of believing his promises over my warnings, of treating responsibility like a character flaw instead of a virtue. Jimmy, she said through the tears. Yeah? Do you think Chuck will call me back? I looked at my reflection in the coffee shop window. 37 years old, stable job, reliable car, emergency fund, good credit. Everything Chuck wasn't. No, Mom, I don't think he will. Why not? Because Chuck only calls when he needs something. Right now, you need something from him. That's not how Chuck works. She was quiet for a long time. Then, I really messed up, didn't I? Yeah, you did. After we hung up, I sat in my car for another 20 minutes, watching people walk past with their ordinary problems. None of them were learning the hard way that co-signing means you pay when the other person doesn't. None of them were discovering that their responsible child had been right all along about their irresponsible child. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Kim. "How's your mom handling the truck situation?" "About as well as you'd expect." "And Chuck?" "Disappeared. 47 calls, no answer." "Wow." "She asked me to try calling him, like he'd answer for me when he won't answer for her." Kim was quiet for a moment. Then, "Are you going to help her?" "Help her what? Pay Chuck's truck loan? Absolutely not." I meant emotionally. I thought about that. Emotional help, support, comfort. All the things she'd given Chuck unconditionally for 31 years while rationing them for me. "She chose this," I said finally. "She chose to believe Chuck was responsible and I wasn't. She chose to co-sign his loan after refusing mine. She chose to ignore everyone who warned her. Now she gets to live with those choices. That's cold. It's honest." But as I drove back to work, I wondered if there was a difference. The bank called at 8:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I know because I was staring at my computer screen, reconciling quarterly reports when my phone buzzed with Mom's number. I almost didn't answer. Hadn't spoken to her in 3 weeks, not since the Repo incident. But something made me pick up. "Jimmy?" Her voice was shaky, different. Not the panicked crying from before, but something worse. Defeat. "What's wrong now?" I kept typing, didn't look up from my spreadsheet. "The bank called. About the truck loan." She paused, and I could hear her breathing heavily. "They're saying I owe more money." I stopped typing. "More than what?" "More than what they already took. The woman, Betsy something, she said the truck sold at auction for $32,000. But I still owe—" Her voice cracked. $14,800. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling tiles in my office. Of course it wasn't over. "Mom, that's how repossession works. If the car sells for less than what's owed, you're responsible for the difference. But they took the truck. How can I still owe money on something I don't have?" I could picture her in her kitchen, probably still in her work uniform from the night shift at Walmart. She'd been picking up extra hours since this started. "Because you co-signed a $49,000 loan on a truck that's now worth $38,000, and it only sold for $32,000 at auction. Math doesn't care about fairness." Silence. Then, "There's more." My stomach dropped. "What kind of more?" "Another collections company called yesterday about Chuck's old apartment. The one on Maple Street. They said I co-signed the lease 3 years ago, and he owes $8,000 in unpaid rent and damages." I closed my eyes. 3 years ago, right around the time Chuck had gotten evicted from his previous place for, surprise, not paying rent. And Mom had swooped in to save him again. "How much total are we talking about, Mom?" "I don't know. I'm scared to add it up." "Add it up, now. I'll wait." I heard papers rustling, then the scratch of a pen. Mom had always done math by hand, never trusted calculators. Dad used to joke that she could balance a checkbook in her head, but needed to see the numbers on paper to believe them. Truck debt, $14,800. Apartment, $8,000. And another pause. There might be credit cards. Might be? He had me co-sign for 2 cards when he was starting the landscaping business. Said it was for equipment purchases. I forgot about them until they called this morning. The air conditioning in my office suddenly felt too cold. "How much?" $4,500 on one card. Unknown on the other. They're mailing me a statement. I grabbed my own pen and did the math. 14,800 plus 8,000 plus 4,500. "Mom, you're looking at least $27,300. And that's before we know about the second credit card." She made a sound like she'd been punched in the stomach. 27,000? Minimum. Could easily be 30,000 or more. "Jimmy, I don't have $30,000. I don't have $3,000. My savings account has $812 in it." I stared out my office window at the parking lot below. Rows of cars, people going about their normal Tuesday morning routines, completely unaware that 2 miles away my mother's financial life was imploding because she'd believed my brother was responsible. What does Chuck say about all this? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Chuck? Chuck hasn't answered his phone in 6 days. I've called 47 times. 47, Jimmy, I counted. 47 calls. I could picture her, sitting in that kitchen, hitting redial over and over, watching it go to voicemail. The same woman who used to tell me I was being too persistent when I'd call twice in one day. His voicemail is full, she continued. I drove to his apartment yesterday. The landlord said he moved out 2 weeks ago. Didn't leave a forwarding address, just gone. What about Francesca? She blocked me on Facebook, won't answer her phone either. Of course she did. Francesca had always been smart enough to see which way the wind was blowing. She'd probably moved on to some other guy with a truck and a credit card by now. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Okay. When you co-signed for Chuck, the truck, the apartment, the credit cards, did you read what you were signing? Long pause. I trusted him. He explained what it was. That's not what I asked. Did you read the documents? No? So quiet I almost didn't hear it. He said it was just paperwork, that it wouldn't matter because he'd make all the payments. I put my head in my hands. 27 years old, and I was having to explain basic financial literacy to my mother because she'd trusted Chuck's explanations over actual legal documents. Mom, when you co-sign something, you become equally responsible for the debt. Not partially responsible. Not responsible if something goes wrong. Equally responsible. As if you took out the loan yourself. I didn't know that. The documents you signed would have explained that. In detail. Usually in bold print. She was crying now, soft sniffling sounds that reminded me of when I was 8 and had found her in the kitchen after Dad lost his job at the plant. Except this time, there was no Dad to fix it. No plan. No safety net. Just the consequences of 27 years of enabling Chuck's irresponsibility. What am I going to do, Jimmy? I looked at my computer screen, at the neat columns of numbers that made sense, that balanced, that followed rules. Then I thought about Chuck, probably in some new city by now, already working on his next scheme, his next victim. Maybe he'd found some other middle-aged woman with a soft spot for entrepreneurs and a willingness to co-sign loans. You're going to pay it, I said finally. All of it. Because that's what responsible people do when they sign contracts. I can't pay $30,000. Then you'll set up payment plans, or declare bankruptcy, or let it destroy your credit for the next 7 years. But Chuck isn't going to pay it. He's gone, Mom. He got what he wanted and disappeared. She was quiet for a long time. I could hear the clock on my office wall ticking, the muffled sounds of my coworkers in the hallway, the normal rhythm of a normal Tuesday morning in a normal office where people showed up and did their jobs and paid their bills. Finally, she spoke. He asked me for money. What? Chuck, before he disappeared. He came by the house last Thursday and asked if he could borrow $2,000. Said he had a new business opportunity, pressure washing. I laughed out loud. Couldn't help it. Pressure washing. Of course. Let me guess. He just needed startup capital and he'd pay you back with interest. How did you know? Because it's the same story he's been telling since high school. Different business, same bullshit. Sorry, I added, remembering Mom didn't like profanity. I told him no. First time in my life I told Chuck no about money. How'd that go? He got angry, said I was being unsupportive, that I'd never believed in him. Then he left and I haven't seen him since. I felt something shift in my chest, like a door opening that had been closed for a long time. You told him no. I told him no. She said it again, like she was testing how it sounded. I told him I couldn't afford to help him anymore, that I was in trouble because of the truck loan. He said that wasn't his problem. What exactly did he say? He said, "You co-signed it, Mom. That's on you. I can't help it if the business didn't work out." I closed my eyes. Even now, even after everything, Chuck couldn't take responsibility. It was Mom's fault for co-signing, the business's fault for not working out, the economy's fault, the customer's fault, anyone's fault but Chuck's. I'm sorry, Jimmy. For what? For not listening to you. For not listening to Kim. For not listening to Grandma Elizabeth. For believing Chuck when everyone else could see. She trailed off. Could see what? That he was using me. 2 years later, I was sitting in my office reviewing quarterly reports when my phone buzzed. Mom's name flashed on the screen. I almost didn't answer. We hadn't spoken in months. Not since that awkward Christmas dinner where she spent the entire evening talking about Chuck's new venture, while I sat there cutting my ham in silence. Jimmy, I need your help. Her voice was shaking, barely above a whisper. What's wrong? I asked, though part of me already knew this call would somehow involve Chuck. There's a man at my house with a tow truck. He says he's here to repossess Chuck's truck, but Chuck doesn't live here. He keeps showing me papers and saying I'm responsible because I co-signed. The panic in her voice was real, raw. Jimmy, I don't understand what's happening. I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the Seattle skyline. The rain was coming down hard, drumming against my office window. Mom, when you co-sign a loan, you become equally responsible for the debt. If Chuck stops paying, the bank comes after you. But it's not my truck. I don't even drive it. Doesn't matter. You signed the paperwork. Your signature made you liable for every payment. I could hear her breathing getting faster, more shallow. He won't answer his phone. I've called him 12 times this morning. The repo man says Chuck is 3 months behind on payments. 3 months, Jimmy? That's almost $3,000. $3,000. I thought about the Honda Accord I'd wanted 2 years ago, the one she'd refused to co-sign for. The extra $2,400 I'd paid in higher interest rates because my own mother didn't trust me with an $18,000 loan. Meanwhile, Chuck had rolled up to that family dinner in a $52,000 truck with her signature on the paperwork. Where is Chuck now? I asked. I don't know. The repo man went to his apartment first, but he moved out 3 weeks ago. Didn't tell anyone where he went. His girlfriend Francesca said he just packed up one night and left. Of course he did. I could picture it perfectly. Chuck realizing the walls were closing in, grabbing his stuff, and disappearing without a word to anyone. Leaving Mom holding the bag like he always did. Jimmy, please. Can you come over? I don't know what to do. I glanced at my computer screen, then at my watch. It was 10:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I had 3 client meetings this afternoon and a presentation to finish by 5. I'm at work, Mom. I can't just leave. This is an emergency. It's your emergency, I said quietly. Not mine. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I could hear the repo man in the background, talking to someone on his radio, probably confirming the truck's location. Jimmy, please. I'm begging you. Mom, do you remember what you told me 2 years ago, when I asked you to co-sign for that Honda? Jimmy, this isn't the time. You said Chuck was responsible and I wasn't. You said he was mature, that he'd handle his obligations, so let him handle this. He's not answering his phone. Then I guess he's not as responsible as you thought. I hung up and turned back to my computer, but the numbers on the spreadsheet kept blurring together. I kept thinking about that dinner, the way she'd looked at me with such certainty when she'd said those words. He's responsible, you're not. As if my perfect payment history, my stable job, my emergency fund, none of it mattered compared to Chuck's empty promises. My phone buzzed with a text from Kim. Everything okay? You look stressed. I looked up to see her standing in my office doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. She'd been working late on a client presentation in the conference room next door and had probably heard my voice through the thin walls. Repo man showed up at my mom's house, I said, accepting the coffee gratefully. Chuck stopped making payments on that truck. Kim's eyebrows shot up. The $50,000 truck she co-signed for? 3 months behind, almost $3,000 in missed payments. And she's surprised? Kim settled into the chair across from my desk. Jimmy, we saw this coming from a mile away. I told you it would end badly. I know. But she chose to believe Chuck instead of listening to anyone with sense. Kim studied my face carefully. She asked you to help? Asked me to come over and hold her hand while she deals with the consequences of her choices. I took a sip of coffee, savoring the bitter warmth. I said no. How do you feel about that? I thought about it for a moment. 2 years ago, I would have dropped everything and rushed over there. I would have tried to fix it, tried to mediate, tried to make everything okay. But something had shifted in me since that dinner. Maybe it was watching Chuck drive away in a truck worth more than I made in a year. Maybe it was the look on Mom's face when she dismissed my financial responsibility so casually. I feel free, I said finally. For the first time in my life, Chuck's mess isn't my problem to solve. Around noon, my phone started buzzing again. Mom, calling every 20 minutes like clockwork. I let them all go to voicemail. By 2 o'clock, she'd left 7 messages, each one more desperate than the last. Jimmy, they took the truck. They found it at some apartment complex and towed it away. The repo man says I still owe money even though they took it back. How is that possible? The bank called. They want to talk about something called a deficiency balance. Jimmy, I don't understand any of this. Chuck finally answered his phone. He said it's not his problem anymore since they took the truck. He said I shouldn't have signed if I didn't want to pay. Jimmy, he hung up on me. I listened to each message with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because the system was finally holding someone accountable for Chuck's behavior. Sadness because that someone was my mother, who'd spent 30 years enabling him without realizing the price she'd eventually pay. Kim appeared in my doorway again around 3. Still haven't called her back? Nope. She's probably terrified. She should be. Maybe terror will teach her what 27 years of watching Chuck's behavior couldn't. That evening, I was cooking dinner when my phone rang again. This time it wasn't Mom. It was Grandma Elizabeth, Mom's 81-year-old mother who'd always been the voice of reason in our family. Jimmy, honey, I heard about the truck situation. Hi, Grandma. Yeah, it's a mess. Your mother called me crying. She's in quite a state. I could picture Grandma Elizabeth sitting in her small apartment, probably working on one of her crossword puzzles while she talked. She'd never liked Chuck much, had always seen through his charm to the selfishness underneath. I told her not to co-sign that loan, Grandma continued. Told her Chuck had never finished anything he started, but she wouldn't listen. She never does when it comes to Chuck. No, she doesn't. But Jimmy, she's learned her lesson now, the hard way. Has she, though? Or is she just scared because the consequences finally caught up with her? Grandma was quiet for a moment. I think this might be different. She keeps saying she was wrong about you boys. Says she can see now that Chuck was using her. A little late for that revelation. It is. But people can change, honey. Even stubborn old women like your mother. I wanted to believe that, but I'd heard variations of this conversation before. Every time Chuck disappointed her, Mom would have a moment of clarity, would see him for what he really was. Then he'd show up with some new scheme or sob story, and she'd fall for it all over again. We'll see, I said. 3 weeks later, Kim and I were having dinner at our favorite Thai restaurant when my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Can we meet for coffee? I want to talk to you about something important. I showed Kim the message. Think it's about Chuck? Probably. Maybe he's back asking for money to fix this mess. But when I met Mom at the Starbucks near her house the next Saturday, she looked different. Older, more tired, but also somehow more solid, less frantic. Thank you for coming, she said, wrapping her hands around her latte like she was trying to absorb its warmth. What did you want to talk about? I owe you an apology, a big one. I waited, not making it easy for her. I was wrong about Chuck. I was wrong about you. I was wrong about everything. Her voice was steady, controlled. The truck loan was just the beginning. After they repossessed it, I found out about other things. An apartment lease I co-signed 3 years ago that he broke. Credit cards he got with me as a guarantor. Jimmy, I owe over $30,000 because of Chuck. $30,000. I tried not to let my shock show on my face. Jesus, Mom. I'm working extra shifts at the store. I had to dip into my retirement savings. My credit score dropped so low I can't even get a car loan, and my car is dying. She looked directly at me, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. But that's not why I asked you here. Okay. I treated you badly, for years. I favored Chuck because I thought he needed more help, but really I was just enabling him. And I ignored you. My son who worked hard, got good grades, built a stable life. You asked me for one favor in your entire adult life. One small favor, and I said no. I remembered that conversation, the way she'd dismissed my request so casually while talking about Chuck's potential. Then 3 months later, I co-signed a loan 3 times bigger for Chuck without even thinking about it, because he asked. She shook her head. I called him responsible and you irresponsible, when the exact opposite was true. Why? I asked. Why was it so easy to say no to me and yes to him? Mom was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee. Because you never needed me. You figured things out on your own, made good decisions, handled your responsibilities. Chuck always needed rescuing. And I mistook needing rescue for needing love. So you gave him what you thought was love, and gave me what? Neglect? I gave you expectations. High standards. I thought that was enough. She looked up at me. I was wrong. You deserved better. You deserved a mother who saw your accomplishments and celebrated them, who trusted you and supported you, who treated you like the good son you've always been. I felt something shifting in my chest, a tightness I'd carried for years starting to loosen. But I wasn't ready to let it go completely. What do you want from me, Mom? Nothing. I don't want you to loan me money or help me fix this mess. I made it, I'll clean it up. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. I see you now. And I'm sorry it took losing everything to open my eyes.